The Kreth fleet retreated on the morning of the 5th day. Warlord Thrak gave the order with bitter fury burning in his hearts. He had lost 93 ships. Nearly half his invasion force was gone, destroyed by a species that should have been easy prey. His remaining vessels limped away from Sereth Prime, their engines struggling to carry them back to Dominion space. Behind them, the humans did not pursue. They had won their victory. They did not need to add cruelty to it. Captain Lisa Monroe watched the enemy retreat from a bed in a Volanthi hospital. Her escape pod had been damaged during the final moments of her sacrifice, and she had suffered burns across her arms and face. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Ambassador Kirill sat beside her, his 6 limbs folded in the Volanthi posture of deep respect. He had not left her side since she was brought to the surface. "Your fleet is victorious," he said softly. "The Kreth are gone. My people are free because of what you and your kind have done." Monroe tried to smile, though it hurt to move her face. "How many did we lose?" Kirill was quiet for a moment. 153 ships destroyed. Over 4,000 humans killed. Many more wounded. He paused, his eyes wet with tears. "We will never forget them, Captain. Never." Monroe closed her eyes. 4,000 people who had crossed the galaxy to save strangers. 4,000 families that would never be whole again. She thought about Amy Collins, the cargo pilot who had rammed a Kreth destroyer. She thought about the crew of the Dawn's Light, the first ship to fall. She thought about all the names she would never know, all the stories that ended in the fire above this peaceful world. "It was worth it," she whispered. Every one of them would say it was worth it. Across the Volanthi homeworld, celebrations mixed with mourning. The people who had faced extinction now walked freely under open skies. They gathered in public squares and private homes, speaking of what they had witnessed, trying to understand the miracle that had saved them. Volanthi children asked their parents about the humans. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why did they help? The answers were always the same. They came because we needed them. They came because that is what humans do. Observer Nalis presented her final report to the Galactic Coalition Assembly. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species. All gathered to hear what had happened at Sereth Prime. She stood before them, her usually calm voice trembling with emotion she could not fully explain. "I was sent to observe humanity," she began, "to assess their capabilities and their threat level. I can now provide my assessment." She paused, looking around the assembled representatives. The Sitharani, the Moradi, the Kelleran, all the species who had received the Volanthi distress call and done nothing. "Humanity is dangerous," Nalis said, "but not in the way we feared. They are dangerous because they care. They are dangerous because they cannot look away from suffering. They are dangerous because when someone asks for help, they answer. All of them answer." She pulled up recordings from the battle. Ships dying in flames. Civilians flying converted mining vessels into military formations. Old soldiers and young volunteers standing side by side. The humans lost 153 ships at Sereth Prime. They lost over 4,000 lives. Their military was outnumbered and outgunned. By every rational measure, they should have stayed home. They should have protected their own worlds and let the Volanthi fall. Her voice hardened. But they came anyway, because somewhere in their evolution, somewhere in their history, humans developed something that most species never find. They developed a belief that no one should face darkness alone. The assembly was silent. Representatives who had ignored the Volanthi distress call shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Humanity is dangerous," Nalis repeated, "but only to those who threaten the innocent. Only to those who believe that the weak exist to be exploited. To everyone else, humanity offers something rare and precious. She met the eyes of every representative in turn. They offer friendship. And having witnessed what they did for the Volanti, I believe that is an offer worth accepting. On Earth, the human ambassador to the Galactic Coalition was summoned to explain his species' actions. Jack Ellis was a simple man, a former teacher who had entered politics late in life. He stood before the assembly with his hands clasped behind his back. Ambassador Ellis, the coalition chair asked, "We have heard Observer Nalis's report, but we want to understand from your perspective. Why did humanity sacrifice so much for the Volanti? What did you hope to gain?" Ellis thought about the question. He thought about the messages he had received from the families of the fallen. He thought about the memorial services being held across human space. The Volanti asked for help, he said simply. That is all the reason we needed. But the cost, the chair pressed. Surely you calculated the cost before acting. Ellis smiled sadly. You misunderstand humans. We do not calculate the cost of doing what is right. We calculate the cost of doing nothing. And for us, that cost is always too high. On Seraph Prime, the Volanti built a memorial to the humans who had died defending them. It stood in the center of their capital city, a tall spire of crystal that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns across the surrounding plaza. 4,000 names were inscribed on its surface. Amy Collins, the crew of the Dawn's Light, soldiers and civilians young and old from every human colony in the galaxy. Each name represented a story that ended too soon, a life given so that others might live. Ambassador Kiral spoke at the dedication ceremony. His voice carried across the silent crowd, reaching both Volanti and the many humans who had come to pay their respects. Before humanity came to our world, I thought I understood courage. I thought I understood sacrifice. I was wrong. He looked up at the memorial, at the names gleaming in the sunlight. These people did not know us. They had never seen our world or met our children. They had no reason to die for us except one. Someone asked for help, and they could not say no. He turned to face the crowd. From this day forward, the Volanti and humanity are bound together. Not by treaties or trade agreements, but by something deeper. By the knowledge that when we were alone in the dark, strangers came to light our way. Young Volanti children approached the memorial, placing flowers at its base. Human children stood beside them, some holding hands with their new Volanti friends. Far away, on a quiet evening in a small town on Earth, a little girl named Sophie asked her father about what had happened. She had seen the news reports. She had heard people talking about the battle. Daddy, why did so many people go to help those aliens? They were so far away. Her father knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his. Because that is what humans do, sweetheart. When someone needs help, we go. It does not matter how far away they are. It does not matter if we have never met them. What matters is that they are afraid and alone, and we can do something about it. Sophie thought about this for a moment. Will I have to do that someday? Help people far away? Her father smiled, pulling her close. Maybe someday. But for now, you just have to remember the lesson. When someone asks for help, you answer. You always answer. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Species that had ignored the Volanti distress call began to reconsider their policies. The Kreth Dominion, humbled by their defeat, became more cautious in their expansion. And humanity, once dismissed as young and insignificant, earned a new reputation. They became known as the ones who answered and across the stars. In civilizations both old and new, that reputation became a promise. If you were alone in the dark, if you faced an enemy you could not defeat, if you sent a message into the void begging for help, there was a species out there who would come. They would bring everything they had, and they would never stop fighting until you were safe. 3 days passed. 3 days of continuous battle in the space above. Seraph Prime. 3 days of fire and death and desperate courage. Captain Lisa Monroe had not slept in 50 hours. Her eyes were red and her hands trembled from exhaustion, but she refused to leave the bridge. Around her, the crew of the Resolute worked in shifts, but she stayed at her post. She owed that much to the people dying under her command. The tactical display told a grim story. The human fleet had been reduced from 400 ships to just under 300. Thousands of humans had died. But the Kreth had suffered too. Their fleet of 200 had shrunk to 140. For every ship they destroyed, the humans made them pay. Captain, Lieutenant Park reported, "We are detecting more human ships arriving." A fresh convoy just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Monroe felt a surge of hope. How many? 63 vessels, Captain. Mostly civilian craft, but there are 8 military frigates among them. Reinforcements. Even now, after 3 days of slaughter, more humans were coming. Word had continued to spread throughout human space. People who had hesitated at first were now racing to join the fight. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was showing the universe what it meant to stand with your allies. On the surface of Seraph Prime, the Volanthi medical centers had been transformed into something remarkable. The Volanthi healers worked beside human doctors, learning each other's techniques, sharing knowledge across the gap between species. Dr. Maria Santos had been operating for 18 hours straight. Her surgical team had saved 47 human lives today alone. But she had also learned something surprising. Volanthi medicine was advanced in ways human science had never explored. Their techniques for tissue regeneration could save lives that would otherwise be lost. "Your people are remarkable," she told a Volanthi healer named Thissa, as they worked together on a badly burned Marine. Thissa's 6 limbs moved with gentle precision as she applied healing compounds to the wounded man's skin. "Your people are the remarkable ones, Doctor. You came to save us. You are dying to save us. We only offer what small help we can provide." Santos shook her head. "It is not small. Right now, it means everything." In the orbital battle, Observer Nallis continued to document what she witnessed. Her reports to the Galactic Coalition had grown longer and more detailed with each passing day. She described human tactics, their willingness to sacrifice, their refusal to surrender. "I have studied many species," she wrote in her latest transmission. "I have seen courage, and I have seen cowardice. But I have never seen anything like what the humans are doing here. They know they cannot win by conventional measures. They know they are dying in greater numbers than they are killing. And yet they continue to fight. They continue to arrive. Every time I think they must finally break, more of them appear." She paused, searching for words to describe what she was feeling. "I believe the humans have something the Kreth do not understand. The Kreth fight for conquest. They fight for power and territory. But the humans fight for something else. They fight for each other. They fight because somewhere down there, on that planet, people are afraid. And humans cannot ignore fear. They cannot turn away from suffering. It compels them to act in ways that defy all logic." Warlord Thrak had stopped laughing days ago. His flagship was damaged, his fleet was bleeding, and the humans simply would not break. Every time he thought they were finished, fresh ships arrived to replace the fallen. "How many more can there be?" he demanded. "How many humans exist in this galaxy?" His intelligence officer checked the reports. "Warlord, the humans have colonies spread across over 40 star systems. Their total population is estimated at approximately 20 billion. 20 billion. Thrak felt a chill run through his armored body. If even a fraction of that population decided to fight, if even 1% of humans were willing to die for these strangers, then his fleet would be overwhelmed eventually. He had to end this quickly. He had to break the human spirit before reinforcements grew too strong to defeat. "Target the human command ship," he ordered. "All forward vessels, concentrate fire on the Resolute. We take out their leader, and the rest will fall apart." The Kreth fleet surged forward. Dozens of warships focused their weapons on the Resolute, pouring fire into its shields. The human cruiser shuddered under the assault, its defensive systems failing one by one. Monroe knew what was happening. She knew her ship was dying, but she also knew what her death could mean if she used it correctly. "All hands, abandon ship," she commanded. Her voice was calm, steady, almost peaceful. "That is an order. Everyone to the escape pods. Now, Captain, what about you?" Park demanded. Monroe smiled at her young tactical officer. He was a good man. He would make a fine captain someday. "Someone has to fly this ship into their flagship, Lieutenant. The Kreth command structure is centralized. We take out Thrak, and their fleet loses cohesion." "Let me stay," Park said. "Let me do it." "No." Monroe's voice was firm. "You have a family waiting for you back on Earth. Get to the pods." "That is my final order." The crew evacuated in minutes. Monroe sat alone on the bridge, watching escape pods launch into the chaos of battle. Kreth weapons continued to pound the Resolute, tearing through its hull. Destroying systems one by one, she aimed the dying ship at Thrak's flagship and pushed the engines to maximum dot. The Kreth did not see it coming until it was too late. The Resolute, burning and broken, crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds. It struck the flagship directly in the engineering section. The explosion was visible from the surface of Sereth. Prime, Volanti, and humans alike looked up at the new star that bloomed in their sky. Monroe ejected at the last possible moment. Her escape pod tumbled through the debris field, battered and damaged but intact. She watched through the tiny window as the Kreth flagship broke apart, secondary explosions rippling through its hull. Thrak survived. His command bridge was built to withstand catastrophic damage, and he managed to transfer to a support vessel. But his flagship was gone. His command structure was in chaos. His fleet had lost direction, and the humans, seeing what Monroe had done, fought with renewed fury. Commander Hayes led a charge directly into the confused Kreth formation. Sergeant Lawson, 73 years old and grinning like a young man, commanded the weapon systems on a frigate that destroyed 3 enemy ships in rapid succession. Civilian vessels that should never have survived this battle continued to hold the line dot by dawn of the 4th day. The Kreth had lost nearly half their fleet. Their soldiers were exhausted. Their morale was shattered dot, and still the humans kept coming. Ambassador Kirill watched from the surface as the battle turned. He had lived for over 200 years, and he had never witnessed anything like this. A species he had barely known existed had crossed the galaxy to save his people, had bled and died in numbers that defied comprehension, and now stood on the edge of victory. He thought about the future. He thought about what it would mean to call such people friends. For the first time since the Kreth arrived, he did not think about survival. He thought about hope. The stars rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Then the human fleet burst into normal space. Ship after ship emerging from faster-than-light travel in a cascade of light and energy that lit up the darkness around. Sereth Prime. Captain Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the tactical display as friendly signals appeared across the screen. 417 ships, more than she had dared to hope for. Mining vessels flew beside military cruisers. Cargo freighters with welded armor took positions next to destroyers. Private yachts crewed by volunteers filled the gaps between larger ships. It was the strangest fleet ever assembled. It was also the most beautiful thing Monroe had ever seen. "Open a channel to all ships," she said. "This is Captain Monroe. I am assuming command of the combined fleet. All vessel captains, report status and combat readiness." The responses came flooding in. Some ships were fully armed and ready. Others had limited weapons and minimal shielding. A few were held together with hope and determination more than anything else. But they were all here. They had all come. On the surface of Sereth Prime, Ambassador Carol watched the sky fill with human ships. The Volanthi people emerged from their homes and shelters, looking up at the impossible sight. Children pointed and asked their parents what was happening. Elders who had lived through many crises stood in silence, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Strangers had come to save them. Hundreds of strangers, from a species they barely knew, had crossed the galaxy to stand between them and destruction. Warlord Thrak studied the human fleet from his command bridge. His initial amusement had faded into something closer to irritation. The humans had brought far more ships than expected, and their formation suggested they actually intended to fight. Warlord, his tactical officer, reported, "The human vessels are deploying in a defensive pattern around the planet. They are positioning their civilian ships behind their military craft. So they have some sense after all," Thrak growled. "It will not save them. Order the fleet to advance. Let us show these creatures what happens to those who challenge the Dominion." The Kreth fleet began moving forward. 200 warships built for conquest, armed with weapons that had devastated countless worlds. Their engines burned with dark fire as they closed the distance between themselves and the human formation. Monroe watched them come. She had studied Kreth tactics during the journey. She knew their ships were stronger, their weapons more powerful, their crews more experienced. By every measure that mattered in warfare, the Kreth should win this battle easily. But Monroe also knew something about humans that the Kreth did not understand. Humans did not fight by the numbers. They fought with their hearts. She opened a channel to the Kreth flagship. "Warlord Thrak, this is Captain Lisa Monroe of the Human Defense Fleet. You are ordered to withdraw from Volanthi space immediately. The people of this world are under our protection." Thrak appeared on screen, his 4 eyes burning with contempt. "Human, you amuse me. You bring your collection of broken ships and converted garbage haulers to threaten the Kreth Dominion. You do not even have enough military vessels to match a quarter of my fleet." "You are correct," Monroe said calmly. "We are outgunned and outmatched. But I am going to give you one chance to leave peacefully, because that is what civilized people do." Thrak leaned forward, his teeth gleaming. "And if I refuse?" Monroe smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Then we will teach you something about humans. We do not surrender. We do not retreat. And we do not abandon people who need our help. You will have to kill every single one of us to reach that planet. And I promise you, Warlord, you will lose more ships doing it than you can afford." The channel went dead. Thrak sat back in his command chair, the first hint of uncertainty crossing his face. He had crushed many enemies in his career. He had watched species beg for mercy, offer surrenders, flee in panic at the sight of his fleet. He had never seen an enemy smile at him before the battle began. "All ships," he commanded. "Open fire." The space between the two fleets erupted in light. Energy beams crossed the void. Missiles launched in swarms. The first human ships took hits, their shields flaring and failing under the assault. The freighter Dawn's Light was among the first to fall. It was a cargo vessel crewed by 12 volunteers who had installed laser cannons in its cargo bay. Its shields lasted 11 seconds against Kreth weapons. Its hull lasted 3 more. The crew never had time to escape, but as the Dawn's Light died, the ships around it kept fighting. They did not break formation. They did not run. Commander Danny Hayes led his converted mining ships into the thickest part of the battle. Their industrial cutting lasers, designed for slicing through asteroid rock, proved surprisingly effective against Kreth armor. 2 enemy destroyers fell before the Kreth even understood what was hitting them. "Keep firing," Hayes shouted to his crew. "Do not let up for a second." On the Resolute, Lieutenant Kevin Park coordinated the defensive pattern. He was 26 years old, barely old enough to remember the colony wars. But he had trained his entire adult life for moments like this. "Civilian vessels, fall back to position Delta," he ordered. "Military ships, concentrate fire on the lead Kreth formation. We need to slow their advance." The battle raged for hours. Human ships died by the dozens. Mining vessels, cargo freighters, private yachts, all torn apart by Kreth weapons. But for every human ship destroyed, they took Kreth vessels with them. Pilot Amy Collins flew a cargo freighter called the Maria. She was 34 years old, a mother of two who had left her children with her sister before joining the fleet. She had never been in combat before. When her ship's weapons failed, she did not hesitate. She aimed her vessel directly at a Kreth destroyer that was about to fire on a crippled human cruiser. "This is Collins on the Maria," she said calmly into her radio. "Tell my kids I love them." The Maria slammed into the Kreth destroyer at full speed. Both ships vanished in a ball of fire. The cruiser she saved managed to limp away to safety. On the surface of Sarath Prime, the Volanthi watched the sky burn. They saw ships explode like dying stars. They saw tiny escape pods falling toward the planet, carrying wounded humans who had ejected before their vessels were destroyed. Ambassador Kirill ordered rescue teams to recover every pod. The Lanthi healers prepared their medical facilities for the wounded. They had never treated humans before, but they would learn that as night fell over the Volanthi capital. The battle continued in orbit above. The human fleet had been pushed back, forced into a tighter defensive formation. They had lost nearly 100 ships, but the Kreth had lost 60 of their own, far more than Thrak had expected. On his flagship, the warlord stared at the casualty reports with growing fury. These humans fought like cornered animals. They threw themselves at his ships without fear. They sacrificed themselves to protect each other. It was not supposed to be this hard. "Continue the attack," he ordered. "They cannot sustain these losses forever." But even as he gave the command, he knew something had changed. This was no longer a simple conquest. This was a war. And for the first time in his career, Warlord Thrak was not certain he would win it. The news traveled faster than any ship could fly. Within hours, every human colony in the galaxy knew about the Volanthi. They knew about the Kreth fleet hanging in orbit like a death sentence. They knew that Earth Command had given the order to respond, and they answered. On the mining colony of New Pittsburgh, Commander Danny Hayes heard the call while supervising ore extraction from an asteroid field. He was 51 years old, a former military pilot who had retired to civilian life after losing his wife to an accident 3 years earlier. He had thought his fighting days were over. He gathered his crew in the main hangar. There were 47 of them, rough men and women who spent their days drilling rock and hauling cargo. None of them were soldiers anymore. Most of them had families waiting back home. "Back home. You have all heard what is happening," Hayes said. "The Volanthi need help. Earth is sending a fleet, but they need every ship they can get. Our mining vessels are not warships, but they are big, and they are tough. We can mount weapons on them. We can make a difference." He paused, looking at the faces around him. "I am not ordering anyone to come. This is not a military operation. This is a choice. Anyone who wants to stay behind, I understand completely." No one moved. No one said a word. They just stared at him with steady eyes, waiting for orders. Hayes felt something warm rise in his chest. Pride, maybe, or love for these stubborn, beautiful people who refused to let strangers die alone. "All right then," he said quietly. "Let us get to work." Across human space, similar scenes played out again and again. Cargo ships were retrofitted with laser cannons. Passenger vessels emptied their holds to make room for supplies and ammunition. Engineering crews worked without sleep, cutting metal and welding armor plates onto hulls never designed for combat. On Earth, Dr. Maria Santos organized the medical response. She was the chief surgeon at the Global Health Center, a woman who had dedicated her life to healing. She had never been to space, never seen combat, never fired a weapon. But she understood that people were going to die out there, and they would need doctors. She recruited 200 medical volunteers in a single day. They loaded hospital ships with supplies, medicines, and surgical equipment. They trained on the journey, learning how to treat wounds in zero gravity, how to operate in ships under fire, how to keep working even when everything was falling apart around them. Sergeant Pete Lawson was 73 years old. He had retired from the Marine Corps 15 years ago and spent his days fishing at a lake near his home. His wife had passed away last summer, and his children kept asking him to move closer to them. When he heard about the Volante, he put on his old uniform. It still fit, though tighter than he remembered. He reported to the nearest military base and asked to rejoin. The young officer at the desk looked at him with surprise. "Sergeant, with all respect, you are past the age limit for active duty." Lawson smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "Son, I have been killing enemies of humanity since before your parents met. You can either give me a weapon and point me at the Kreth, or you can try to stop me. One of those choices will go better for you than the other." He was on a transport ship within the hour. Observer Nallis watched all of this with growing confusion. She was a Sithrani analyst assigned to monitor human activity for the Galactic Coalition. Her job was to study this young species and report on their behavior, their capabilities, their potential threat level. She had expected the humans to send a token force, perhaps a dozen ships at most. That was what other species did when coalition members requested aid. It was the polite gesture, the minimum required to maintain good relations. Instead, she watched as hundreds of ships began converging on the Volante system. Military cruisers and destroyers formed the core of the fleet, but they were joined by an impossible variety of civilian vessels. Mining ships, cargo haulers, passenger transports, even private yachts with homemade weapons welded to their hulls. Nallis sent a priority message to Coalition headquarters. The humans are responding to the Volante distress call in unprecedented numbers. Current estimates suggest over 300 vessels en route, with more joining constantly. I do not understand what I am witnessing. This response makes no logical sense. She continued watching. She saw families saying goodbye at spaceports. She saw elderly veterans putting on uniforms they had stored for decades. She saw children giving lucky charms to parents who might not return. The Sithrani did not cry. Their biology did not allow for it. But Nallis felt something strange in her chest as she watched. She did not have a word for it. On the Volante homeworld, Ambassador Kirill received reports of the incoming human fleet. At first, he did not believe the numbers. His staff showed him the sensor data again and again, but it seemed impossible. 400 ships, he whispered. They are sending 400 ships. His aide, a young Volante named Sorrel, stood beside him. Ambassador, many of these vessels are not warships. They are civilian craft with minimal weapons. Against the Kreth fleet, they will be destroyed. Kirill understood this. He understood that thousands of humans were flying to their deaths to save people they had never met. The weight of it pressed down on him until he could barely stand. Why would they do this? Sorrel asked. It is not rational. It is not safe. What drives them to throw away their lives for strangers? Kirill thought about the question for a long time. He thought about all the species he had studied, all the civilizations he had encountered in his years as a diplomat. None of them behaved this way. None of them rushed toward danger for people who were not their own. I think, he said slowly, that humans do not see strangers the way we do. I think when they look at us, they see themselves. They see their own families, their own children, their own homes. He paused, his eyes wet with tears. They are coming because, to them, we are not strangers at all. We are family they have not met yet. Far across space, Warlord Thrak received his own reports about the incoming fleet. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by his officers, and listened as his scouts described the human response. When the report finished, Thrak laughed. It echoed through the bridge like thunder. 400 ships, he said, amusement thick in his voice. Half of them are cargo vessels and mining rigs. The humans send their garbage to fight us. His second-in-command shifted nervously. Warlord, our scouts report that the humans are still mobilizing. More ships are joining the fleet every hour. And they are not slowing down. Thrak waved his armored hand dismissively. Let them come. Let them all come. The Kreth have crushed 100 species. These humans are young and foolish. They will learn the same lesson everyone learns eventually. He turned to face the observation window, staring at the peaceful blue world below. They will learn that the weak cannot protect the weak. They will learn that courage without strength is meaningless. He smiled with his mouth full of teeth. And then they will die. But deep in the back of his mind, in a place he would never acknowledge, a tiny voice whispered something troubling. The humans were not acting like prey. They were not acting like a species facing superior force. They were acting like something he had never encountered before. They were acting like they had already decided to win. The warning lights turned red across every screen in the Volanthi command center. Ambassador Kirel stood at the observation window, his 6 limbs trembling as he watched the sky fill with enemy ships. The Kreth Dominion had come, and they had brought enough firepower to burn his world to ash. Kyrel was old, even by Volanthi standards. He had spent his entire life studying peace, learning the art of healing, and building bridges between species across the galaxy. His people were not warriors. They were farmers, healers, and philosophers. They had no weapons capable of fighting back against what was coming. The communication screen behind him crackled to life. The face that appeared was terrifying. Warlord Thrak of the Kreth Dominion stared at him with 4 burning yellow eyes, set deep in a face covered with thick armored plates. His mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. Volanthi Ambassador, Thrak said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. You have 72 hours to surrender your world. Your people will serve the Dominion. Your resources will fuel our expansion. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Kirill felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had 3 of them, and all 3 were racing with fear. Warlord Thrak, the Volanthi, are members of the Galactic Coalition. An attack on us is an attack on all member species. Surely you understand the consequences. Thrak laughed. It was a horrible sound, like bones breaking. The Coalition is weak. They will send strongly worded messages and empty threats. No one will come to save you, Ambassador. No one ever does. The screen went dark. Kira stood alone in the silence, knowing that Thrak was probably right. The Coalition was a loose alliance of species who preferred diplomacy over action. Most member worlds were too far away to help in time. Others simply would not risk war with the Kreth over a small agricultural planet on the outer rim. But Kirill had to try. He walked to the emergency communication console and began recording a distress signal. His voice was steady despite his fear. He explained the situation clearly. He gave the coordinates. He begged for help from anyone who could hear him. The signal went out across the galaxy, traveling through relay stations and communication networks. Most species who received it simply noted it in their logs and continued with their daily business. The Sithrani calculated the odds of successful intervention and decided it was not worth the risk. The Marathi expressed sympathy, but claimed their fleet was needed elsewhere. The Kelleran did not even bother to respond, but the signal also reached a small human outpost on the edge of coalition space. The Earth vessel Resolute was on a routine patrol when the distress call came through. Captain Lisa Monroe was in her quarters when the alert sounded. She was a woman of 43 years, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had joined the Earth Defense Force at 18 and had spent 25 years protecting human colonies from pirates, raiders, and hostile wildlife. She was tired, but she was not the kind of person who could ignore a cry for help. She reached the bridge in less than 2 minutes. Her crew was already gathered around the communication station, listening to the Volanti transmission. "How far?" Monroe asked. Lieutenant Kevin Park, her young tactical officer, checked his console. 3 days at maximum speed, Captain. But the Kreth have at least 200 warships in that system. We have 1 cruiser. Monroe nodded slowly. She understood the math. 1 ship against 200 was not a battle. It was suicide. But she also understood something that the numbers could not capture. Someone was asking for help. Someone was afraid and alone, facing an enemy they could not defeat. "Contact Earth Command," she said. "Tell them what we have received. Tell them I recommend immediate response." The message traveled back to Earth in seconds. Admiral George Porter received it in his office at the Global Defense Headquarters. He was an old soldier, a man who had fought in the colony wars and had seen what happened when good people did nothing in the face of evil. Porter gathered his senior staff within the hour. They studied the reports, analyzed the enemy fleet composition, and calculated the resources needed for a successful intervention. The numbers were not good. The Kreth were powerful, well-armed, and experienced. Earth had a smaller fleet, spread thin across dozens of colonies and outposts. "The logical choice is to stay out of this," one of his advisors said. "We cannot win against those odds." Porter stared at the map showing the Volanti system. He thought about the distress call he had heard, the fear in the ambassador's voice, the desperate hope that someone would come. When has humanity ever made the logical choice? He asked quietly. He gave the order. Every available ship was to proceed to Sarith Prime immediately. Reinforcements would follow as quickly as they could be mobilized. Earth was going to war. The word spread fast. It traveled through military channels and civilian networks. It reached colony worlds and mining stations and research outposts scattered across human space. And something remarkable began to happen. People volunteered. Retired soldiers reported to duty. Civilian ship captains offered their vessels for the mission. Engineers worked through the night to install weapons on cargo freighters and mining ships. Families gathered to say goodbye to loved ones who might not come back. Captain Monroe received the news aboard the Resolute. She was not going alone. A fleet was forming behind her, growing larger by the hour. Ships were coming from every corner of human space, crewed by people who had never met the Volanti, but could not stand by while innocent. People were enslaved. She opened a channel to the Volanti homeworld. Ambassador Kirel appeared on screen, his alien face tired and sad. He had clearly not slept since the Kreth arrived. "This is Captain Lisa Monroe of the Earth Defense Force," she said. "I am speaking on behalf of humanity. We have received your distress call." Tyrell's eyes widened. His limbs twitched with sudden hope. "Captain, the Kreth have 200 warships. Even if you come, even if you bring everything you have, you cannot match their strength." Mono smiled. It was a small smile, but it was warm and genuine. "Ambassador, I need you to understand something about humans. We do not count ships when someone needs our help. We count reasons to fight. And right now, Your people are the only reason we need. Kirill did not know how to respond. In all his years of diplomacy, he had never heard anything like this. Species did not risk themselves for strangers. It was not logical. It was not safe. Why? He managed to ask. Why would you do this for us? Monroe thought about the question. She thought about her own children back on Earth. About the colony she had protected years ago. About all the times in human history when ordinary people had stood up against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. Because you asked, she said simply. Hold on, Ambassador. Help is coming. The screen went dark. Kirill stood in the command center, surrounded by his frightened staff, and for the first time since the Kreth arrived, he allowed himself to hope. Somewhere out there, strangers were coming to save his people. Humans were coming, and they were bringing everything they had.